just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Randy Robinson, good to have you here today. And you know, if you missed it, back in 2017, the Museum of the Bible opened up in Washington, D.C. And fascinating, I mean, just fascinating from a historical standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, you know. And so I'm excited today to be able to talk about one of their latest exhibits. It is on the Samaritans, which I think is interesting as well. And it is called, let's see, The Samaritans, a Biblical People Special Exhibit. And I have two of the curators for the Museum of the Bible with me today. Dr. Jesse Abelman and Dr. Jeffrey Kloha are with me. And I will let them tell you exactly what they do so we get it right. And we'll give you a little peek into this exhibit on the Samaritans and some of the fascinating things about it. So I'm glad you're here today. Chat is open if you're watching live. Hello, Judy. Hello, Loretta. Great to have you guys both here. And if you're watching in the replay, then we always invite your comments. Like, share, subscribe, do those things. And this will be a fascinating one. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you on Life Today Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So let's get into the exhibit itself and explain to people what it is you're showing and why it is so fascinating. And then we'll get into some of the details of what you guys do and sort of the response you've had. So this thing's been open since September, is that right?
September. Yeah, we opened September 16th, yeah.
September 16th. Okay, now, so walk us through a little bit of what exactly it is that you're showing.
Sure. Jeff, do you want me to take this one?
Go ahead, yeah.
So the Samaritans Biblical People is an exhibit, like it sounds, and as you said, about the Samaritans. Everyone has heard of the Good Samaritan, right? Even if you're not someone who's familiar with the biblical story, it's a term that's just everywhere in the English language and our pop culture, right? And I'm sure most of your audience knows the gospel story as well, so no question. But very few people know that the Samaritans continue to exist in the world today. They are a micro people with, as of our opening, 862 people living in two communities, one in the West Bank by their holy mountain, Mount Gerizim, and one in the Tel Aviv suburb of Holon. And they're still around today. They've been around for thousands of years, continuing to live their life. And the exhibit sort of is here both to tell their story and also to tell sort of the stories of contact with them by people of other faiths.
So explain for maybe someone who doesn't know, what exactly is a Samaritan?
Sure. So the way the Samaritans tell their story, and this is important because they tell their story differently than others might, but the way they tell their story, the Exodus from Egypt takes place. The Israelites come to the land of Israel, and sort of unlike the story we know from the book of Joshua, and then the books of Judges and Samuel, they immediately go to the city of Shechem, where God always intended, according to them, right, the Israelites should be centered, and they stayed there until the priest Eli, who we know from the book of Samuel, decided to take off and go to Shiloh, and then eventually, of course, David would bring would go to Jerusalem and build the temple there, and the Jerusalem Mount Zion would become the center of Judean worship, of Jewish worship, right? Or the other group of Israelites. So they see themselves as a distinct Israelite nation from the Jews. The groups of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh and part of the tribe of Levi, the tribes of Joseph and the priestly tribe. And they trace their lineage all the way back there. And so that's who that's their story.
Okay. Now, how does that because I may just be showing my ignorance, but that's not the way I understood them to be. Is there a difference in the Christian understanding, or?
Well, I'm not going to know. So their Bible only consists of the 5 books of Moses. Okay. The Pentateuch, right? That's their entire scriptures. Okay. They do not have any of the rest of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, which the Jews, which is Jewish scripture, right. And they certainly don't have the New Testament. Sure. Right. Sure. That's not part of which Christians have. Right. Right. And so the story is told in the Hebrew Bible, right? Is that the tabernacle immediately went to Shiloh, right? That whole Shechem piece, right, doesn't happen in the narrative that's shared by Jews and Christians in the Hebrew Bible. And so what does that mean, right? So let's fast forward to the story of the Good Samaritan for a second, right? You have this conflict between Samaritans and Israelites, right? Samaritans and Judeans, right, who become the Jews, right? And so that's why, right, the in the story of the Good Samaritan, right, who's the Samaritan? Who's the good neighbor? The outsider, right? The person whom you would see, whom Judeans whom Jews would have seen as other, right? He's represented in the same way, right? The story of the woman at the well, right? The Samaritan woman at the well in the Gospel of John, right? She's surprised that Jesus will eat with her. Right. Jeff can speak to you much more with much more expertise than I can about these questions. I'm curator of Hebraic and Judaica. I'm Jewish. The New Testament is not my area of expertise. But in terms of when I'm talking about the Samaritans, right, you can really see that difference. And they've been there. At Mount Gerizim in what is today the city of Nablus, the biblical city of Shechem, since then. At one point, they were all over the Eastern Mediterranean, communities in Damascus, in Egypt, in Greece. We have some wonderful artifacts from the Samaritan diaspora in Greece that the Greek Antiquities Authority was willing to loan us. That helps tell that story of the ongoing life of these biblical people who are today now much reduced.
All right, Dr. Kloha, let me ask you this because I recognize and appreciate that this exhibit is telling their story from their perspective. Now, so correct me. My understanding, and again, I'm going to be completely wrong, so feel free to say so, is that the Samaritans were the descendants of Jews who were conquered and had intermarried with, I don't know what they were, but they weren't, Israelites, and so they were sort of a mixed ethnic group. Is that right? Have I heard that before, or am I just making that up?
That's the way it's really narrated in the Hebrew Bible, as Jesse said. Okay. And during when the Northern Kingdom was carried off into exile, other peoples were imported who intermarried with the population there that was left behind. Right. And adopted then various forms of Jewish practice in a way to kind of preserve their safety, but not fully Israelite, or not actually Israelite at all.
Okay, so I'm not making that up.
Yeah, but you're kind of getting one side and then the other side, right?
Gotcha.
Competing histories, and who gets to tell their story, right? Is kind of the question, and it just introduces this complexity, right, into the story. So why are they there? Who are they? And, if you want to talk from a New Testament perspective, why does Jesus interact with them in the way that he does? And how does that show itself in the Gospels, which is really pretty fascinating, actually.
So now do you come more from a New Testament kind of Christian perspective?
Yeah, I taught New Testament as a professor for 18 years, so that's kind of my thing.
So let me ask you this: what stood out to you in hearing their version of their history? Because surely that you got to, right? This has to be interesting.
Yeah, I think a few things really stood out of course, I'm very familiar with the texts, but really digging into this, into the archaeology and seeing how they describe themselves actually helps clarify and kind of put some fine detail really on the gospel accounts. So, for example, in the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, the way that is set up, of course, is there's a teacher of the law who comes up to test Jesus. And the question is about who is interpreting and literally doing the law properly. And Jesus goes into this dialogue. The teacher of the law thinks he's doing it properly. He thinks he has all the answers. And Jesus says, well, wait a minute, maybe you don't. And he introduces this parable as a way to kind of, in a way, draw the teacher in and catch him at the end, right? But the whole question, again, is who is doing the law properly? Who's doing the Torah properly? And the example he uses, in contrast to the priest and the Levite, is a Samaritan who their very identity is wrapped up in Torah. That's their sacred book. They see themselves literally as the guardians, right? They see the word Samaritan actually as a derivative of the Shomrim, the guardians of the Torah. And so for them, Torah is central. And what Jesus is doing is a little bit subversive. Yeah, it's partly that the Samaritan is an outsider, but he's an outsider who has the Torah.
Right.
And even this outsider who has the Torah really knows what it means, and that it means caring for the person in need, no matter who they are. So it's not simply that they're outsiders and Jesus is kind of saying, I'm going to pick your worst enemy and hold them up as a mirror. It's, these are outsiders, but they have Torah and they're actually following what Torah really says. So it's not just a random reason that Jesus brings up the Samaritans. It's specifically about Torah.
That's fascinating. I mean, so the more I learn about the Bible, the more I realize how little I know about things and understand things.
It's the kind of thing where every time you peel back a layer, there's more, right? And what's intriguing to me, again, I taught New Testament for 18 years, and I'm still just that refinement of why the Samaritans in Luke 10, and why does Jesus respond in Luke 9 the way he does to the disciples who want to call down fire on the Samaritans, and Jesus says, no, you're not going to do that. That they're carriers and preservers of the law of the Torah, and of course then in the Christian mission, excellent people to bring the gospel to. And you see that in the book of Acts, right? Yeah. They receive the gospel in Acts chapter 8, among the first people to do so, actually, in the book of Acts. Okay. So there's continuity and a reason that mission, goes forward in the book of Acts even.
So, let me ask you this, because we know that, some of the Jews accepted Christ, many of them did not. What has been since, the first century and really since then, has been the response of the Samaritans to the idea of Christ as the Messiah?
Yeah, that's partly what we explore in the exhibit. Maybe I'll start, Jesse, and you can fix things. Part of what we talk about in the exhibit is after the biblical period, after the New Testament, how did they interact with the Jewish population, with the Christian population, and with the Muslim population eventually? And I think it's fair to say for most of the history, it was not very happy. There's a lot of conflict. Some of it's social, some of it's political, right? You have all these powers come in and they respond differently to different rulers, and they take sides, and there's economic issues. So each group is really maintaining their kind of religious identity over and against each other. But what's interesting is in the late 19th century, when especially British and Americans begin to travel to the Holy Land and learn more about the history and the archaeology and encounter the Samaritans, they, again, like Jesse, they're kind of surprised to find living Samaritans there. Yeah. And they're still, sacrificing the Passover lamb on the Passover. And they're still following Torah, and they're still worshiping on Mount Gerizim. And there's actually a desire to help them, right? To help them with their identity, to help them survive. And this carries through with the early Zionist movement and ultimately with the nation of Israel. So in a way that in the 20th century, this sort of became a positive interaction, whereas for the previous 1900 years, it was pretty negative.
Are most of the Samaritans today in Israel?
Yeah, Jesse, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so I said they're split. It's a complicated political situation for them because their holy mountain, right, Mount Gerizim, is in the West Bank, right, which is politically not fully part of the state of Israel, under Israeli control, right? It's part of sort of the Palestinian territories, and so they have, on the one hand, a very good relationship with the state of Israel. Half of the population is in Israel, as I said, as a suburb of the city of Tel Aviv called Holon. They are all citizens of Israel, but the ones who live in the West Bank are also carry identity cards from the Palestinian Authority,
really?
Right, which is not a state, so you can't be a citizen, right? And so they have, it's complicated for them. Yeah. They have to sort of navigate the world in delicately. That any kind of religious minority, right? Depending on the day and who and which Samaritan you're talking to, which particular group, what's happening politically. You'll have people with alliances on either side of that conflict, which can be complicated. Again, because they have to live there, right? And so how do you? Well, yeah, how do you do that?
They're caught between two competing forces, and they're really of neither one of them entirely, right?
Exactly right. Right. We say they're neither Israeli nor Palestinian, neither Jew nor Arab, right? They're both ancient and modern. These are some of the taglines from the exhibit. Yeah. And I think it speaks to that sort of difficult situation they find themselves in. Yeah. But also, I think their real strength. And this is something I think the exhibit very effectively teaches us that can be helpful to us, is to sort of see their tenacity in the face of all of that, and their devotion to Torah, right, over the millennia, as and how they continue to guard it. Yeah. I think is very powerful for everybody to sort of see.
Yeah, I mean, wow, talk about a people group who are in a struggle that we don't even think about them on any kind of regular basis, which is entirely unfair. Okay, so I'm going to show people this is the website. This is the exhibit on the website, museumofthebible.org, which I threw the link in the chat if you're watching that. But you can get a little feel for what's going on the website. Obviously, nothing like actually going and visiting. And so I would encourage that. Make your plans now. But for the exhibit itself, both of you kind of walk me through how you guys put it together, what is there, and what people will see when they walk through.
Sure. It's okay if I lead off with this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it's divided into three sections. And I think Jeff spoke very eloquently before about, sort of telling it from their perspective. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we want other perspectives too. And you can learn something from distance also. So there are sort of two main sections. One that we call Meet the Samaritans, which tells the story of the Samaritans from their own perspective, through the use of artifacts from their history, including archaeological remains from ancient Israel and Greece. As I mentioned, you've got a beautiful mosaic floor from a synagogue in a village called Shalavim, ancient Samaritan synagogue. We have a gigantic almost 2 ton stone inscription from another Samaritan synagogue that was near Mount Gerizim, with the Ten Commandments in the Samaritan Hebrew script, which is different from the Jewish Hebrew script.
Really?
Same language, same alphabet, but written in sort of different. The letters look different, but there's a one-to-one correspondence. Okay. And so that's sort of that section. And then we have a section called Encounters, where we talk about the Samaritans' encounters with other peoples, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and their sort of a long history there. And we get to see some of the other perspectives too. right? That's really important. That gets us some of that distance, right? We can, we don't in the Meet the Samaritans side, we don't talk about the biblical, the Hebrew Bible narrative.
Right.
We do in the Encounters section because that needs to be there, right? That's important.
Right.
And so we needed a way to sort of have those both there. And then the third is really a zoom in on that period that Jeff was talking about, that late 19th, early 20th century moment, right? Where, first of all, relationships start to get better between all of these people. And we focus on a particular figure, the Samaritan high priest at the time, Jacob, son of Aaron, and his, he became like almost a minor celebrity. He was in newsreels, he was in newspapers, he was in all over the place. And he built relationships with a American Congregationalist minister named William Barton, who became a big advocate for the Samaritan people in America, among American Protestants for the most part, with a British Jewish scholar named Rabbi Moses Gaster, who sort of helped bring their version of their history into the academic discussion. And he built a special type. You talked about things in the exhibit. He built a special typewriter so that he could type in Jewish Hebrew, right? And it would the machine would then turn it into Samaritan Hebrew.
Wow.
Right. So it's a symbol of the connection, right? That sort of like, it's very, very cool custom thing. We're super excited to have it in the exhibit. And then the third figure, someone who became very important to the Samaritans, was a young man in 1907 named Yitzhak Ben Zvi, who became later the second president of the state of Israel in the 50s, and really helped them build up their community because of this relationship that he built up 40 plus years ago, as a young man trying to sort of learn what the land of Israel was like and who its peoples were.
So it sounds like it took only a couple thousand years for the Jews and the Samaritans to finally maybe learn to get along a little bit. I mean, is that kind of the picture?
I mean, yes. I mean, there's a major moment in history in the 1840s. I think this is really the big turning point for that relationship, even if it doesn't change everything right away, right? Which was the community in Nablus, in Shechem, there was a pressure from a group of Muslim extremists. It was under the Ottoman rule, right? Turkish Ottoman rule and Muslim Empire. And there were a group of, they had religious tolerance. They were allowed to follow their religion, but there was this group of extremists who were pushing these stories. How Samaritans are atheists. Samaritans should not be given special, should not be given religious tolerance. We should, they were pushing this towards the Ottoman rulers, right, to the empire. The Samaritans actually asked the chief rabbi of Jerusalem at the time, Chacham Bashi was the title at the time, and his name was Rabbi Gagan. And he wrote a letter, and he said, the Samaritans are Israelites who keep the Torah of Moses, and they should have these same protections that Jews have. Jews and Christians are both under Islamic law allowed religious tolerance in the Ottoman Empire, and the Samaritans should be included as well. And they accepted that. The rulers accepted that. The empire accepted that, and so they were protected. But that was for a Jewish leader to say something like that about the Samaritans, right? Like that was a big deal at the time. So it was a major, again, recognizing their connection to Torah and that shared heritage, even as they're different people with different ways of understanding it and all of that.
Right.
It was a very big deal.
Fascinating. All right, Dr. Kloha, let me ask you this, because I think when most people think of the Museum of the Bible, they think, oh, it's this kind of Christian thing. And so you would expect everything to be from a Christian perspective. Why did you guys decide, and I love this, by the way, that, for example, when you're going to have an exhibit on the Samaritans, you're going to tell their story from their perspective and then introduce the other perspectives, more of the Jewish perspective, more of the Christian perspective. I love that you're not just sort of propagandizing in a sense, or just telling one side of the story would be more fair way of saying it. But you're letting people tell their own stories in this museum of the Bible. How come you guys? Why is that important to you guys?
Well, because the Museum of the Bible is really about the Bible and the contents of the Bible, the history of the Bible, and especially the impact of the Bible. And that the impact of the Bible is not limited to a single people group or a single country, but its impact has been worldwide for literally thousands of years. And including small groups like the Samaritans, large groups all over the world. And by focusing on the Bible, it allows us to show that broad impact in very large ways and introduce people to things to kind of gain an understanding that they wouldn't have had before, but especially to see that broad impact and be able to learn from it. So how are the Samaritans seeking to follow the Bible, their Torah, in a present day situation, right? It's a challenge, and they have very unique challenges around that, traditions, marriage, all kinds of things, right? And it allows other groups who maybe don't have those same issues to kind of see what that struggle looks like and maybe learn from it, right? So to learn from each other how to follow the Bible and how allow the Bible to kind of have its impact. So yeah, it allows people to, again, see the broad history and impact of the Bible, but also learn from others who are seeking to follow it on their own.
I'm guessing they were probably pretty excited to be able to do this, to tell this to an American audience. Yeah,
it's the first time, we had a great partnership with a professor at Yeshiva University who actually Jesse was a student of his. So it was a great way to collaborate, and we brought some of our expertise and theirs. It's the first major exhibition anywhere in the world on the Samaritans. And I'm really pleased we were able to bring together, if you think of every important historical artifact about the Samaritans, we have it in the gallery. The Delos inscription from Greece, 150 BC, the typewriter Jesse mentioned, that huge lintel inscription, the floor mosaic, even what's probably the oldest Torah scroll from the Samaritans is in the exhibit. Wow. So archaeologically, it's all right there. But at the same time, we also have these, videos of the present day community, them talking about how they're preserving the text, how they're trying to even, pass it on to future generations. So it's this, history, present day, it's all kind of present. Yeah. And for me, what was especially appealing is, like Jesse started off with, everybody's heard of Samaritans, right? Whether you know the Bible or not, you know about a good Samaritan, right? And so if it's had this impact culturally, that's a way for us to kind of hook people and say, well, let us actually kind of fill in the details here and to see how all this actually goes back to the Bible, right? Which is just kind of the starting point.
Yeah, fascinating. No, I love it. All right. Is there anything people need to know about coming to see the exhibit or the museum itself that we haven't covered? Because if people are watching down. This far, so, they're interested. So what's the next step?
There's a lot of stuff to see. This particular exhibit we have at this point until January 1st, but we're in progress to extend it through April. So I think we'll get there. We just got to get a couple lenders to agree to it. We've had such a great response to it that we want to extend it, and it's all here. So if you're coming for Christmas in Washington, or you got a spring break next year and you're coming for Cherry Blossom Festival, it's a great opportunity to see that. And my encouragement would be, if you do get the chance to come and visit, to really set aside essentially an entire day. The museum is 430,000 square feet. There are 5 floors of exhibits. We have the largest exhibit of archaeology of Israel outside of Jerusalem. We've got the widest and broadest collection of biblical artifacts anywhere in the world on display, and then some really fun stuff, experiential kind of things, interactive, virtual reality kind of things for every age group. And this is just kind of an icing on the cake reason to come into Washington.
Yeah, sounds interesting. All right, Dr. Abelman, yeah, go ahead. Anything you want to
add? Yeah, and just if you're local to Washington and you're interested, if you're looking for specific days that might be good to come, I can tell you. I believe where the wonderful filmmaker who made the films in the exhibit, Moshe Alafi, also made a documentary, and I believe we're going to be showing that a couple more times over the course of this run. on I want to say December 4th and November 6th.
November 6th.
And November 6th. Those two dates.
Definitely. Yeah.
Those 2 dates. And so if you're in DC already and you're interested in the Samaritans, come see it. You can come see it there. It's going to be making its festival premiere in New York on November 8th. If you're local to New York and are interested in the Other Israel Festival, I think it's gonna be streaming through there too. So if you Google Other Israel Festival, you can catch it streaming. It's a wonderful complement to what we have in the exhibit. It doesn't tell exactly the same story, but fills out the story of the Samaritans even more. And so come to the museum on those. If you can come to the museum on those dates, you'll get even more Samaritans.
Very cool. This is fascinating to me, and I'm learning things that I didn't know. And like you said, I've heard of the Good Samaritan my whole life, but man, there's so much more. Fascinating. Appreciate both of you guys, your time and your expertise, and just filling our audience in on some of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you guys watching. Hit share, hit like, hit follow, hit subscribe, and check out museumofthebible.org. There's the URL on the screen if you're watching, museumofthebible.org, and the fascinating exhibit with the Samaritans. And if you can get to DC, make plans now. Come back. We've got more for you next time here on Life Today Live.
I love you.